Hello everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. In our last episode, there was joy with the birth of a son for Prince Edward and Princess Alexandra, and it made Queen Victoria happy too. The thing that didn't make her happy was that Prince Edward was feeling animosity against Prussia because they were going to invade Denmark. Princess Alexandra was very upset about the situation and was making her sick, so let's see what's going on today. Princess Alexandra was anxious to visit her old home and to bring comfort to her parents if she could. Queen Victoria was against it because she feared that such a visit might have political repercussions. It was a troubled summer for Princess Alexandra and the Queen. When the Queen became depressed, she regretted the Danish marriage. She wrote a letter to the King Leopold. She referred to Princess Marie of Leiningen, wife of her half-nephew Ernest, as quite like my own daughter, much more so than poor Alex, with whom I can never get more intimate. Much as I like and love her, she comes completely from the enemy's camp in every way. Stockmar was right. The princess took care not to be in open opposition with her mother-in-law, and no one seems to have noticed how often it might have happened. But when their wishes clashed, it was Princess Alexandra who in the end quietly won the victory. And so it was now. The British government had no objection to the proposed visit to the Danish territories, and the Queen gave permission. She even allowed the baby Prince Albert Victor, but said that after their visit in Denmark, the baby was to go back to Balmoral and not to be taken on a further trip to Sweden, Germany, and possibly Russia. She was justifiably worried about the health of her baby grandson, whom she described as very backward and delicate-looking, though a dear, good little thing, adding sadly, I can't help but being anxious about it. In September, the whole family set off for Denmark, where they were received with open arms. King Christian remarked the day of their arrival was the first happy one he had known for a very long time. The princess was rapturously greeted wherever she appeared, and the Danes were delighted to find her husband strolling about the streets of Copenhagen with as little fuss and formality as the members of their own royal family. During this visit, he introduced them to Denmark's most famous citizen, Hans Christian Andersen, whose stories have been the delight of her childhood. Most of the day was spent at the castle of Fredensborg, where there was talk chiefly concerned with the engagement of the princess's favorite sister, Princess Dagmar, to the Russian Tsarevich. The princess was delighted to be back with her own relations, but the only member of her family that was congenial to her husband was the eldest son, the Crown Prince Frederick. Even though he had Danish sympathies, the prince felt bored with life at the Danish court. He felt that the rooms were uncomfortable, the food was indifferent, with the inevitable curry jelly for dessert, and the tedious evenings occupied with nothing more exciting than an old-fashioned game of loo. He was relieved when he could escape to Sweden, where the Swedish king's tastes were more like his own. Queen Victoria had ordered that the prince and princess should remain incognito while in Stockholm and stay at a hotel, but the prince accepted the Swedish king's invitation to stay at the royal palace, writing home to his mother that the hotels are not good and I have not the intention of letting Alex be uncomfortably lodged if I can help it. At this time he was mindful of his wife's interest. In the same letter he pointed out that when his sisters came to England, they stayed for 2 or 3 months in their old home and complained that the brief fortnight which the Queen had allowed the princess to spend in Denmark was certainly not a liberal allowance. On their return, Queen Victoria was less than pleased with the effect that the Scandinavian holiday had upon her son and daughter-in-law. Everything she heard confirmed her dislike of the Danish connection and especially the influence of Queen Louise. Queen Victoria wrote, I am sure the Queen made Bertie do many things which he had promised he would not do. She wrote to the Crown Princess, and again she said, he is entirely in that most mischievous Queen's hands. Alex, as good as she is not worth the price we had to pay for her having such a family connection. I shall not readily let them go there again. Queen Victoria's annoyance was due to the fact that on the journey home the princess had refused to call upon the Queen of Prussia. Queen Victoria could write in moments of anger and irritation, but she could not keep up a show of anger with the princess herself. Her daughter-in-law's charms worked on the Queen Victoria too. The Queen knew that her son was anything but an ideal husband, and in her innermost heart she was grateful to the princess for continuing to love him in spite of much provocation. Queen Victoria wrote to the Crown Prince on November 19th that Alex is really a dear, excellent, right-minded soul whom one must dearly love and respect. I often think her lot is no easy one, but she's very fond of Bertie. Though not blind in years to come, the princess would be more frequently forced to turn a deliberately blind eye towards her husband's behavior. But her fondness for him was never to fail. The Princess of Wales had an affection for her husband, but how warm was the affection? Did her early girlish infatuation ripen and develop into mature love? These are unanswerable questions. Lady Antrim, who lived much in court circles and came to know the princess very well in later life, believed that if she had loved the prince as warmly as he loved her, he might have proved a more faithful husband. Driven perhaps by the instinct of self-preservation, very beautiful women are often a little cold, and the princess may have been one of those chilly beauties. She was a woman who found her chief fulfillment in her children, and in spite of her husband's infidelities, what little evidence we have goes to show that she never contemplated taking a lover of her own. The pattern of her marriage was a common one in her day, and not unusual even now. In the 19th century, such a step would not merely have been frowned upon, it would have been impossible, because of state of divorce laws. A wife's infidelity was a serious matter. The family, not the individual, was the basic social unit, and family stability demanded that a man should be reasonably certain that the children were his own. Wives, however, put up with the unfaithfulness in a husband much as they put up with meanness or bad temper or any of the other disagreeable qualities for which the law offers no redress. The princess may or may not have been cold. Her husband was certainly polygamous by nature. It is improbable that he would have maintained strictly faithful to any wife, whatever her temperament. She made the best of the situation in which she found herself. Her unfaithful husband remained devoted to her, and she would always fall back on that fact for consolation. After all, she's reputed to have remarked to a member of the Seymour family, "He always loved me best." The real issue with her husband wasn't enforced idleness, a state of affairs for which he was in no way to blame. The real issue with her husband was enforced idleness, a state of affairs for which he was in no way to blame. He was not by nature lazy. He could not bear to be unoccupied, and thwarted in his desire to work, he naturally filled his empty hours with play. He yachted, he hunted, he shot, he attended race meetings, he frequented theaters and music halls, he even made friends with the head of the London Fire Brigade. Above all, he gambled, though not so largely as gossip made out. Rumors started, though, because it was thought that he had financial difficulties. Where money matters were concerned, the princess was of no help to help her husband, but rather the reverse. She was totally lacking in financial sense. Money meant as little to her as painting to the colorblind or music to the tone-deaf. The root of the problem wasn't her extravagance, but it was her generosity. She would give away any amount of money to anyone, and if someone got on her about it, she would retaliate by doubling the amount of her original gift. Neither the princess's lack of money sense nor her husband's gambling were the real cause of their financial troubles, which were almost entirely due to the enormous expenditure incurred at Sandringham, where a grandiose program of improvement had been embarked on out of all proportion to the real value of the property. Without counting money spent on the estate, the rebuilding of the house alone was reckoned to cost £80,000, so it's not remarkable to find that every year from 1863 to 1867, the prince's expenditure exceeded his income by at least £20,000. Sandringham being in no way suitable for royal residence, the business of turning it into one was an undertaking necessarily involving astronomical expense. At the beginning of 1865, the old house was still standing because Humbert, the chosen architect, had not yet succeeded in producing a satisfactory design for a new one, but the kitchen and servants' quarters were under reconstruction, a billiard room had been built, and the old conservatory converted into an indoor bowling alley. The estate was in no better condition than the house and required a fortune to be spent on it. New farms were bought, old farms were repaired and made watertight, although it was whispered that the prince cared little for his tenants' comfort or condition of their crops in comparison with the well-being of the pheasants and the partridges in which the estate abounded. At Sandringham, the game was preserved with a strictness which gave rise to talk even in a generation when landlords as a whole were fanatical on the subject of game preservation, a strictness which made the prince unpopular with some of his tenants. His unpopularity never touched his wife. Mrs. Cresswell, a disgruntled farmer, wrote a book, 18 Years on the Sandringham Estate, by the Lady Farmer. And she wrote, "It never occurs to me that the princess is a woman at all, but some exquisite little being, wafted straight from fairyland to say and do the kindest and prettiest things all her life, and never grow old or ugly." At Sandringham, in those early days, hunting was almost as important as shooting. It was a sport which the princess herself much enjoyed, greatly to the horror of Queen Victoria, who at one time went so far as to forbid her to hunt at all, arguing that everyone was shocked by the spectacle of the Princess of Wales following the hounds. At first the princess was much distressed by the prohibition, but she had her own way of dealing with such difficulties. She yielded for a while, but before very long she was back in the saddle and out with the hounds again, and this time the queen was wise enough to admit defeat and let the matter drop. When the princess could not hunt, she would drive herself to the meet. She was an excellent whip, even if slightly reckless and given to driving too fast. A guest at Sandringham had two major causes for complaint: the cold Norfolk climate and the late hours kept by their host. Whist and poker were the usual occupation in the evening, except on Sunday when convention demanded some innocuous games like General Post, and play would be kept up until 2 or 3 in the morning. The prince was always downstairs at a reasonable hour the next day, but the princess never appeared before 11 at the earliest. This fact, coupled with her gross unpunctuality, made the queen suspect that her son's wife did not make his home altogether comfortable to him. Certainly the princess had no great interest in domestic detail, and as a housekeeper she was haphazard. As a hostess, however, she excelled. Set next to the princess at dinner, one guest of these early days recorded most charming of all princesses. So I will end the video here. In this episode, we see how Queen Victoria gets a little irritated with Princess Alexandra because she took the side of her own country. Princess Alexandra had charm, and she knew how to use it. Could never stay mad about her for long. She knew her son wasn't easy to deal with, and speaking to him, it sounds like he may have been unfaithful, but he loved Princess Alexandra, and she had a great love for her children. There were money issues due to the cost of improving Sandringham and its property, but also the prince and princess weren't very good at handling their finances. But mainly it was the property in Sandringham that took a great deal of money to reconstruct. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't subscribed, if you could do so, it would help the channel to grow, as well as giving it a thumbs up. It's all a great help. And if you haven't clicked on the notification bell, if you could do that, it lets you know when a video is posted. If you happen to see a search button pop up, if you could click on that, it will help my channel to keep growing. And more importantly, I want to wish everyone a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you. Bye.